President Biden touting what we see and what he sees as America's comeback in his State of the Union address last night. The president also mentioned the crises that the U.S. is facing at home and abroad under his leadership, from high inflation to the war in the Middle East. But you decide. Watch.
My inherited economy is on the brink. Now our economy is literally the envy of the world. Wages keep going up, inflation keeps coming down. Taking the most significant action ever on climate in the history of the world. No one has a stronger record with Israel than I do. My fellow Americans, the issue facing our nation isn't how old we are, it's how old are our ideas. Hate, anger, revenge, retribution are the oldest of ideas. But you can't lead America with ancient ideas that only take us back.
The president brought up his crackdown on junk fees, honesty from online ticket sellers, and shrinkflation, joking about Snickers bars getting smaller. Jason, your reaction?
The president did not address the big issues of the day. He did not offer anything about how we're going to deal with inflation. He didn't talk about energy independence. He talked about some of these EVs that he's going to do, trying to talk to the people of Michigan, but he never addressed that. They went to the same old playbook Democrats always go to. They promised that they're going to raise taxes. For those watching this show, involved and engaged in business, that he wants to raise the corporate tax rate. He wants to raise taxes. He wants the government to spend more. No mention of the $1 trillion that we're going to have to spend servicing our national debt. None of that was mentioned here, and these are yet the drivers. And for the average person who's sitting home saying, how is it that you're going to help drive down the cost of my Five Guys meal, which is going to cost me more than $20, that he didn't address any of that.
No, because how could he? It would lead back to him and his excessive spending, $6-7 trillion in spending and borrowing on his watch. Alabama Senator Katie Britt brought it up. She slammed President Biden for claiming his economic policies are working in an emotional Republican response. Watch this.
His reckless spending dug our economy into a hole and sent the cost of living through the roof. We have the worst inflation in 40 years and the highest credit card debt in our nation's history. Let that sink in. Hardworking families are struggling to make ends meet today. And with soaring mortgage rates and sky-high childcare costs, they're also struggling to how to plan for tomorrow. The American people are scraping by, while President Biden proudly proclaims that Bidenomics is working. Goodness, y'all, bless his heart. We know better.
In fact, Doug, yesterday, the FDIC said that late credit card payments are the highest since 2011. There are some serious cracks under what President Biden is saying is the envy of the world on the U.S. economy.
Yeah. Look, Maria, I think one of the interesting things, we've talked about how bad the speech was, or political the speech was, but the economic part of this was probably the most disingenuous or also the most tone-deaf part of it. And I was with some Democrats last night. We were talking about this, and I brought this up. I said, it's tone-deaf. They said, well, the economy, the stock market, they go to the stock market. I said, but here's what you don't look at. Gas prices are 40% higher than when Joe Biden came in. Katie Britt mentioned credit card debt. Not only is credit card debt at its highest level in years, almost at record levels, but credit card defaults, auto loan defaults are at high. You're seeing it when they go to pump gas. They're seeing it when they go to buy groceries. They're seeing this in their everyday life. And for him to not even say, look, we're, even to making a mention saying, look, we're trying, but we could do better. He didn't say that. He said, we're doing great. Everything's better. You're just too basically ignorant to know that my economy is what you really need. And I think that's where the tone deafness part comes in. And it lays an opening for Republicans, and especially Donald Trump, to go back to the issues of immigration and the economy and the things that are in the crime issue that are mattering to people in this process. But when you look at the actual numbers for Americans, not the macro pictures that he wants to paint, that's where people feel it. And that's how people look at their lives. And that's what you're seeing reflected in these polls.
Yeah, the president began his State of the Union address, Morgan, talking about Ukraine. Okay, if you can get your head around that, he starts the State of the Union of America calling on Congress to send him the bipartisan national security bill and send money to Ukraine. He also said his administration has been working nonstop to establish a 6-week ceasefire in Gaza. The president was interrupted by a Gold Star father, Steve Nikoy, who his son was once one of the service members, and he was killed at Abbey Gate during Biden's botched U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan. And wait till you hear what happened next. Watch this.
Year before I took office, murder rates went up 30%. 30% they went up. The biggest increase in history.
So after the father who lost his son at Abbey Gate, and he was yelling there, Capitol Police escorted him out of the chamber, and they arrested him. They took him into custody. He was charged with crowding, obstructing, or obstructing Congress. Morgan, your thoughts?
Yeah, I actually saw on social media on X later that he went to meet the other families, Gold Star families of some of the 13 fallen, and they were hugging him and clapping for him. It's just very endemic, Maria. Again, as I talked about last segment, this lack of empathy that President Biden has. You know, he didn't talk about the Americans that are still left behind in Afghanistan. Let me just also quickly address what you brought up about the president leading the speech on Ukraine. Now, listen, everybody knows I'm the foreign policy person. I get really excited in the State of the Union speech when it turns to foreign policy. But I also agree that that does not deserve to be at the beginning of the speech. The beginning of the speech should be about what's going on with America, what's going on at our kitchen table here. I also refuse to be lectured from President Biden about Ukraine whenever the invasion happened on his watch. And it is his policies that failed to deter Putin from invading Ukraine. He's the one that released the sanctions off the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. He's the one that had the gaffe and said, well, if Putin only does a minor incursion. He's the one that re-upped the New START treaty, right? You can look at step after step after step that the Biden administration took, including stopping the lethal aid that we in the Trump administration were sending to Ukraine. The Biden administration stopped that lethal aid, and then Jake Sullivan said they would only send lethal aid to the Ukrainians if Putin invaded. So I refuse to be lectured on Ukraine from people who had the deterrence failure on their watch, and also from people who have seen this war extended over 2 years because they refused to give the Ukrainians what they needed early on. They have totally botched the handling of this war in Ukraine, and I don't think any of us should be lectured by them on it. Now, whenever it comes to the Gold Star families, when it comes to Abbey Gate, when it comes to Israel, I mean, the administration's proposal is to build a pier in Gaza. I mean, that makes absolutely no sense. Somehow they're going to do it without U.S. troops. Listen, I'm old enough to remember when we called these things humanitarian pauses. Now we're trying to call them ceasefires, which is the language of the left. And I would just remind everybody that President Biden still has 6 Americans that are held hostage, right? It's now the middle of March almost. That has happened since the end of October. Americans are held hostage by a terrorist group, and Biden has been unable to get them home.
So let me just get this straight. He started the State of the Union, which is a report card on America, with Ukraine. He starts the speech with sending money to Ukraine, and he did not mention the hostages in Gaza.
Maria?
Yeah.
He should have. Here's what the president should have said. We have American hostages in Gaza. If you want help, you want assistance, you want that pier, you give us our hostages back and the Israeli hostages back, then we'll start that discussion.
That's
Instead,
right.
he gives up the pier and doesn't even mention the hostages.